has an appointment this morning, and so he asked that we continue presiding over the budget for the upcoming fiscal year. I assure you, colleagues, that I'm under the Vice Speaker's authority to continue this budget hearing, and we're not going to be able to stray too far away from outside the box that the Vice Speaker has contained all of us in by way of adopting the rules of engagement. And to make doubly sure that we stay the course, we have OFB to the left and Mr. Branch to the right, and legal counsel and the clerk behind me. And so all I'm going to do is preside. And so we're all covered, and we're all going to continue to get the guidance that the Vice Speaker has been giving us since he gavelled us into this committee of the whole. So we're going to start with Public Works, page 54. The chair recognizes the Oversight Chair, Senator Ada.
Thank you. Mr. Chairman, I really don't have any issues to take up with the Department of Public Works, but if you would allow, on page 51, on item 10, which is under what we're talking about under Department of Administration, there on section 10 on page 51 has to do with the public streetlights appropriation. Now, I guess what's being proposed here is to reduce the appropriation down to, it's about 6.4 million. Normally, we've been appropriating about, I think what DOA was requesting for was 8 million. Mm-hmm. And I would just ask the committee to seriously consider, and first of all, I think the contributing factors to the reduction is because the cost of fuel has been declining, and so as a result, the billings have been reduced. They've also, GPA has been changing out a number of its street lights to the LEDs, which are a lot more efficient. So all that contributes to the reduction in the cost. However, I would suggest that maybe the reduction really should be just half of that, and so that we should give them an additional $1 million for street lights, because there is a need for more street lights in the villages and for secondary streets. Now, about 75% of what we normally appropriate for street lights is for the villages. And in view of the fact that our communities are growing, the police force, they're not in as much as we would like to have a police officer on every street corner. We can't. But we cannot also deny the fact that having better lit streets, I think, contributes to the safety in our communities. And so I think we should take a look at really providing an additional $1 million and reduce, instead of reducing the appropriation by $2 million from what they requested, reduce it by just $1 million. And with that $1 million for additional street lights, that's quite a number. And so I guess we would, I think we'll probably need some language, or maybe just to change the numbers by an additional $1 million. So I would like the body to consider that, because this will be an enhancement of public safety in our communities.
Yeah, thank you, Senator Ada, for those comments, and OFB certainly will guide us, but I believe that any proposals to increase these amounts would have to be offset somewhere else from throughout the budget.
So, and I understand that, and I think that we probably then, in view of that, we really should bookmark this, and and if we can't find $1 million somewhere, then you know, we just need to squeeze out. I mean, I'll tell you, even $500,000 will go a long way. So we're talking at about $50 per street light. So $50 per street light, 1,000 street lights, what's that, 5,000?
And over the past 4 years, the legislature has appropriated $4 million in excess of the actual expenditure level. So even though the appropriation's been provided, based on the spending, they've been spending $4 million less than what was authorized.
No,
so this is why we got this amount, which was the kind of an average of their past expenditure experiences.
I understand, and that's very true. They've been expending a lot less than what has been appropriated annually. But I think if you put it in the bigger context, certainly I think this is an excellent opportunity to increase the number of streetlights in view of the fact that our other public safety resources is really very limited.
Sure.
Thank you.
Thank you. Let me recognize Senator Uggan on this subject.
Thank you very much. First of all, I want to thank the Oversight Chair for DPW for mentioning the need for additional streetlights in our community, because certainly that's part of public safety. And anytime that we light up our streets, it serves as a deterrent and as a prevention to criminal activity. So certainly endorse that concept. The one thing I do have an issue with regards to the allocation, Mr. Chairman, is several years back there was a transition proposal that was presented to the legislative body in terms of providing funding mechanism, and they were supposed to transition all these streetlights to LED, and in the long term that was going to result in a reduction in the requirement for funding from the general fund. But in exchange for retaining the same level of funding, GPA was going to assist and work with the mayors to be able to ensure that they put up additional streetlights. So really the realizable savings would have been zero, but the reality is because the overall cost by installing LED streetlights would now, over the course of the longer term 10-year time frame, that was the number that was given, that those additional savings will be applied towards installing additional streetlights in our community. So I'm not too sure how that project is moving forward, but certainly that's an issue that I would like to perhaps have a conversation with GPA officials, because rather than reducing the allocation, you know, the Oversight Chairman is absolutely correct. We need to find ways in which we can get some additional streetlights out into our community for the safety of our community. Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you very much, Senator Uggan. So, as you know, on page 51, line item 19, Senator Tom Atta raised some concerns with respect to the amount of money that's being appropriated for the public streetlights. Given that we did adopt that section on Friday, there is a correlation between the Public Works' budget, and we are in that section now, versus the public streetlights. So, colleagues, if there's no objection, I'm going to make a little bit of a stretch here and allow that section 10 of beginning on line 19 on page 51, that it be bookmarked, just that particular section, as it's tied to the Public Works budget. So I'm thinking that Senator Tom Atta is also wanting to bookmark the budget for the Department of Public Works, so if any additional monies can be found, that monies will be appropriated on page 54. So we're not really going back. We're tying Senator Tom Atta's concerns with the amount of money we appropriate for streetlights to the actual budget of the Department of Public Works, which is the agency that really is tasked to maintain these streetlights on public property. Is that correct, Senator Tom Atta? So if there's no objection, I imagine that anything that Senator Tom Atta would want to do after talking to OFB would be on page 54. That work? Okay, so we're going to bookmark the DPW's budget, and the next section is the Guam Contractors License Board, which is on page 55.
And I have no objections to that.
Okay, so motion to adopt Guam Contractors License Board budget. Hearing no objection, so ordered. the Guam Board of Registration for Professional Engineers, Architects, and Land Surveys.
Move to adopt.
On the motion to adopt, hearing no objection, so ordered. On the Guam Police Department budget, I recognize the Oversight Chair, Senator Frank Uggan.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Chairman, I do have several amendments that I would like to ask the body to please consider. But first of all, let me just share with you some numbers in regards to the overall allocation. If you take a look at what would be provided to the Guam Police Department, it's $35.6 million. Based on just the personnel requirement, the requirement under the general fund would be $33.4 million. So if we start subtracting 35.6 minus 33.4, and then less the utilities, which amounts to about $1.4 million, and then the fuel costs just for GPD alone on an annualized basis is in excess of $400,000. So, Mr. Chairman, the reality of what we're looking at right now is a department that is in dire need of additional support and assistance from members of this body. And we understand the nature of the conservative revenues that have been provided. But that's one of the reasons why I have several amendments, Mr. Chairman, if our colleagues can consider them. And the first one,
wait,
I'm
if
trying
I
to
may,
get someone to circulate
if
the,
I may, Mr. Chair, on a point of information,
Okay,
the good speaker would.
Yeah, while they're circulating that, Senator Uggan, would you yield to a point of information?
Sure,
Thank
Mr.
you.
Chairman.
I'm just wanting to confirm the numbers because I'm on page 57 right now, and he's talking about 33.4 on the general fund utilization or authorization as listed, and I have 33.7 unless I have the wrong
No,
copy.
because, no, you're looking at the right one. It's just that there's additional personnel funding originating from special funds. So you're looking at general fund allocation of 33.7, police services fund of 1.3, towards the attraction fund of $500,000, which is specifically for the Tumon precinct. And then it adds up to 35.6. So I was looking, Mr. Chairman, just for clarification purposes, I was looking specifically at the budget per the discussion during the course of the budget hearings.
Okay. Senator Muñoz-Barnes, are you okay with that answer?
Yes, I am. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Okay, so Senator Uggan, I recognize you on your amendment.
Mr. Chairman, do you have a copy of the first amendment?
Yeah, I'm going to get it eventually, but I can catch up. Go ahead.
Okay. Mr. Chairman, the first amendment is to insert a new section, to add a new section to under the Guam Police Department. And incidentally, I'm going to have to go with the numerical numbers that are on page 58. So add a new sub-item 6.
Six.
I apologize.
New section.
You're gonna understand why in terms of the sequence of the presentation. First one would be to add a new sub-item 6, notwithstanding any other provision of law, the unexpended balance from the public safety vacancy pool cost account for fiscal year 2016, pursuant to sections 1 and 2 of Chapter 14, Public Law 33-66 for the Guam Police Department shall continue to be available in fiscal year 2017 until fully expended for the purposes set forth therein. As you know, Mr. Chairman, the Guam Police Department right now is in the process of utilizing that particular public safety vacancy pool allocation and is recruiting up to 20 individuals to be able to add to the police force. So, Mr. Chairman, I'd like to request the consideration of the body to allow for this allocation out of fiscal year 16 to be able to continue to support the Guam Police Department.
Thank you, Senator Uggan. I just got some assurances from OFB that this amendment will not affect in any way that this year's budget. And so it's just a carryover or continuing authorization to use those appropriation authorities, similar to what this body did for the Attorney General's office.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Okay. I was saying that in anticipation of Senator Spaldon's consistent concern that we don't want to be offsetting this year's budget by allowing for these carryovers. So, colleagues, you have a copy of this amendment. Are there any objections, any comments? No objections, the motion carries. So this is a new section 6 on page 58. Senator Uggan, you're still recognized.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. I do have another amendment that is being circulated as we speak. which is to add a new subsection. We're going with 7 now. Mr. Chairman, please, I beg the indulgence of the members of the body, because this was initially numbered in a different sequence. And this provision would provide for prior year obligations authorization. If you recall, this body entertained 5 different measures just within the last 60 days to allow for the expenditure of existing fiscal year resources through the Governor's Transfer Authority to take care of some of the obligations that were enumerated by the Guam Police Department. And unfortunately, these are obligations that are due to our personnel. These are obligations that are due to not only our officers, but also to some of the vendors that have provided services to the Guam Police Department. Well, Mr. Chairman, albeit that entire amount that is required for fiscal year 16 for prior year obligations added up to about $1.8 million. And realistically, considering the cash position of the government, the question now is, will the executive branch have sufficient resources, cash in this fiscal year to be able to remit payment on these prior year obligations? And taking into consideration the huge amount, this amendment would provide that flexibility going into the next fiscal year for the chief executive to utilize fiscal year 17 resources to pay prior year obligations. And it reads, prior year obligations authorization, the Guam Police Department is authorized to use funds from the appropriations made in subsection M of section 1 of this chapter for the payment of any and all prior year obligations. Imagalang Guam shall identify and transfer to the department, to the Guam Police Department. I apologize. With that, the first amendment, Mr. Chairman, would be to insert Guam Police Department. I apologize.
So on the Uggan amendment as amended by Uggan.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, colleagues. From any appropriations in this chapter, not restricted from his transfer authority, the aggregate sum necessary for the payment of prior year obligations. The Director of Bureau of Budget and Management Research and the Director of the Department of Administration shall notify the Speaker of Legislature in Guam no later than 5 working days after such transfer is made. And like I said, Mr. Speaker, what we want to do is we want to provide the Chief Executive and the Executive Branch with some of these tools so that, in fact, they can address these prior year obligations that are due specifically to our uniformed police officers and to our vendors who have provided services to the Guam Police Department. And I ask for your consideration, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Senator.
Mr. Chair.
Senator Blas.
Just for housekeeping, I know we disposed of the previous amendment. It says new item 7, and this is new sub-item 8.
No, the previous amendment was 6, and then
6?
now this is going to be 7. He's,
Okay.
yeah. I think this is why we put section then underline, because we could never predict where it's going to fall, in what order. So, but Senator Uggan did make that clarification. So on the amendment by Senator Uggan, Senator Espadon.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Chairman, just to clarify, from my understanding and all our colleagues here, we're talking about about $1.8 million that the amendment seeks to have. Let me see, how does this work? I just want to understand the logistics. The governor we're giving the governor the authority to transfer funds from the police department to the police department? Because we're identifying all appropriations made in subsection M of section 1, and M is the Guam Police Department, and of course I'm not sure what the problem here is.
Yeah, 2 things were, first, the amendment would allow for the payment of a prior year obligation. And then the second amendment and how the mechanics of this is that the governor is authorized to transfer anywhere from Chapter 5, which is the General Appropriations Act, to the executive branch.
Chapter 5.
And again, this amendment would not have a budgetary impact for FY17, but it would have an impact on cash. And so this is where this legislature, through these kinds of authorities, gives the executive branch, particularly the governor and BBMR, to figure out where the management of cash to make sure that the most current need for the day is satisfied.
Okay, so there's 2 parts to this then.
Yeah.
One is allowing the transfer,
And I think Senator Uggan is recognizing that you just don't make a prior year obligation authorization without authorizing how that prior obligation is going to be paid.
Okay, and again, I just want to raise my concern once more, is that by doing this authorization, and I fully understand it, is that we would have to at least anticipate towards the end of next fiscal year that there may be a shortage of funds for GPD or any other agency in which that $1.8 million would be transferred from. And again, the reason why I keep bringing this up is that as we get into fiscal 2017, I just caution all our colleagues here that when we go into any spending bills, to always recognize that we have given this authority to transfer funds from other agencies, and that could potentially cause a shortfall in cash to those agencies in terms of their requirements. And so going forward, the reason why I keep bringing this up is that structurally, as it was mentioned to me, any budget bill, most budget bills basically are structurally efficient in terms of coming up with something balanced by the end of that fiscal year. And
thank you.
I would just always note that.
And also for the information of the body, majority of these prior obligations, as cited in the committee report, deals with the military leave compensation. So these are monies owed to the police officers and for their military service credit. Okay. And believe it or not, 9 out of 10 times the authorization to make payment in prior year actually works, and the governor some way somehow finds the cash to make these payments that people are waiting for. It's just recognizing that he has this authority, but ultimately he has the authority to manage the cash resources. But your concerns, Senator Spadon, are duly noted and absolutely founded.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
So on the amendment, hearing there's no objections, right? Hearing no objections, the motion carries.
Thank you very much.
That will be a new Section 7.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Chairman, I think we already highlighted some of the challenges that the Guam Police Department is going to provide or experience during the course of the entire fiscal year, and I want to thank the members of the body for allowing not only the use of the Public Safety Vacancy Pool Fund and the allowance to carry over those resources, and also for the payment of prior year obligations. There's one other component that I have discussed with a number of our colleagues, Mr. Chairman, and just based on some of the activities that the incumbent chief of police has implemented, you take a look at all the resources that he's been utilized. He's cut down significantly on the overtime, which has been a major heartache of not only the members of this body, but in terms of looking at the overall budgetary impact that the Guam Police Department has towards the use of general fund. But this chief has certainly implemented a good number of positive initiatives. One is the overall reduction of the overtime cost tracking. Previously, it was in excess of $2 million in prior fiscal years, and he's been reducing it to an extent where the overtime could conceivably, by the close of this fiscal year, add up to slightly over $1 million. So that's a significant reduction to allow the department to be able to manage its resources. But when we take a look at what some of his initiatives are for the upcoming month and a half, there has been ongoing discussions about the redeployment of existing uniformed personnel, up to 50 uniformed personnel, out to the villages, Mr. Chairman, and we know exactly what impact that would have. That would reinforce the men and women who are out there in the individual police precincts. It will provide additional police presence in our community. We're also looking at entertaining a different measure at a different time to continue to provide the Guam Police Department with access to financial resources, cash, so that they can procure additional vehicles to add to their patrol fleet. So, Mr. Chairman, it's essential that we also try to identify other additional resources based on the conservative estimates that have been provided. What you have before you is an amendment that I know that the good chair of the Tourist Attraction Fund would have serious reservations for. But, Mr. Chairman, I think the reality is we've got to answer that one question. What is one of the biggest concerns that our community has as it relates directly to our number one industry? And that is the protection and the safety of our people in the villages, and also the protection and the safety of our people who visit our island community. So I have a proposed amendment, Mr. Chairman, and that would add a new subsection 8. And I want to thank Senator McCready, yourself, Mr. Chairman, Senator Tony Adams, Senator Morrison, and certainly request for consideration by other members of this body, that would add a new subsection 8 to read, notwithstanding any other provision of law, the amount not to exceed $2 million is hereby authorized and appropriated from revenues collected in excess of the fiscal year 2017 Tourist Attraction Fund, TAF, adopted revenues to the Guam Police Department to subsidize the operational costs of the Tamuning Precinct Command for the purposes of enhanced police services. The Guam Police Department is authorized to use any of its fiscal year 2017 appropriations for such purposes, and such appropriations shall be reimbursed upon collection of the excess TAF revenues. Mr. Chairman, just so that we're all on the same page, has this been done in recent months? And the answer is absolutely yes. First and foremost, in fiscal year 15, there was a carryover of an identified excess in the TAF that was reallocated towards the operations of the Guam Visitors Bureau. In addition, in order to help fund the overtime and some of the operational requirements of the recently concluded FESPAC, this body had identified, through collaboration with the front office, an additional excess of $1.3 million to specifically be used to reinforce and to support that activity, which the front office and all those involved certainly did an outstanding job. So, Mr. Chairman, this is because of the conservative estimate. I would like to propose that any revenues in excess of the projection certainly be considered specifically for the Tumon precinct. And let me close with saying this, Mr. Chairman, our good Vice Speaker, the Chair of Appropriation, one of the questions I asked was whether, in fact, we're tracking at the $38 million for fiscal year 16 for the Tourist Attraction Fund. And the response that was provided is that we may have already reached that particular projection. So this is not an issue that does not have its justification in terms of possible increases in the Tourist Attraction Fund. And I believe that very firmly that because of the conservative nature of the entire budget, that any excess that is identified out of that particular fund really should go to reinforce and to support Tamuning Precinct Command Center. Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman, and I ask our colleagues for your consideration.
Thank you, Senator Again. The chair recognizes Senator McCready and then Senator Torres. Then, of course, our oversight chair for TAF will have her say. Senator McCready.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I thank the author of the amendment for including us in this proffering this amendment. You know, the Guam Police Department has been limping across the finish line every budget since I've been a senator. And I think when you look at some of these amendments that are happening with the Guam Police Department, in my recollection, in recent history at least, these are the most amendments that have been put into the budget for the Guam Police Department. This is public safety. We normally just kind of look at the budget and say, oh, okay, well, they got what they got, and let's move forward. But this is the first time that actually we're being specific with making them whole. And if you've been to some of their public hearings, their chief of police has a plan, and he's implementing this plan with the help of this legislature. Without the help of the legislature, they cannot implement any of these plans. And there's still problems that we see in the future, such as, at the end of this month, they're going to lose 15 of their operational vehicles that was donated by one of the car dealerships on Guam. So we have to figure out how we're going to now try and implement a program to get those 15 cars replaced, whether they're going to reinstitute it as a kind of a corporate community sponsorship, or they're just going to cancel it altogether, and then we're out 15 vehicles that we see those donated vehicles on the streets more than we see those Crown Victorias or the the actual police cars that they receive through grants. So I like the amendments, and I know it's tough. I know the next speaker, the chairwoman of some of these agencies or this particular agency, might not feel the same way, but if these amendments do pass, Mr. Chair, the Guam Police Department, for the first time that I've known of as a senator, will be whole, will be full, won't need any more authorizations or amendments from the legislature, and they can move forward. And I think the bill that this legislature passed a month ago, which would implement 200 new officers in 5 years and make sure that their promotions were whole, would also be able to, they would be able to see that. So that's, that's my take on this whole GPD situation. It's public safety. We need to protect the public. We need to make sure that the police officers are safe as well when they go home after their shift. And I hope that this legislature sees that and looks at it more of an investment in our community and our public safety than a cost. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Creedy. Senator Torres?
To the main author of this amendment, I just would like to know what would constitute the expense of up to $2 million. There was some reference to overtime. There was another reference to police vehicles. But I think if you were to consider that the budget had been introduced and itemized, what specifically would constitute having to increase it by $2 million?
Senator Ogden, would you yield to the question of, do you have a breakdown for the $2 million?
I don't have the specific breakdown, Mr. Chairman, but what was stated a little earlier is that based on revenue projections for fiscal year 15, there was a carryover in excess of $1.5 million just for that fiscal year, which was reallocated for other requirements per the oversight chair of Tourist Attraction Fund. Also, based on the conservative revenue estimate for fiscal year 16, we had identified up to $1.3 million in collaboration with the front office of additional revenues that were going to be realized out of the Tourist Attraction Fund. And I did request to the Appropriations Chair if in fact the $38-some million for fiscal year 16, whether in fact we're projecting on that particular level. And the response at the beginning of this budget discussion was that we may have already reached that threshold. So just based on that, and then any additional revenues, the adjustment, and then the 10% adjustment in terms of the Tourist Attraction Fund, yes, I believe that there will be some additional excess revenues out of the Tourist Attraction Fund that rightfully should be allocated specifically to the Tumon precinct so that it can reinforce the operational requirement for the Guam Police Department.
Senator Torres, you still have the floor.
My only concern with this, and I'm not adverse to providing the needs, the resources to ensure that our island's public safety is fully equipped. But what I'm concerned about is the way that the amendment is written. It would suggest that I will give you the money first, and then you can decide how to spend it. And I think that in this whole budget process, that's a backward approach. I mean, clearly, any department, if you were to give them more money, would find a way to spend it. But it's a different thing to have a plan and then ask for appropriation. So my only concern is it's a backwards approach. I don't necessarily think that it's a bad thing to give resources where resources are needed, but I think that we need to be a little more responsible when we're talking about $2 million in funds in excess of something. So it's already promised money on money that's not in hand, supposedly is in hand, or projected to be, but it isn't. And I just think that it's a bad precedent to go down this road right now, especially since we significantly cut the revenue projections already from the get-go.
Senator Barnes, do you yield to Senator Underwood? Yeah, okay. Senator Underwood.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I have the same question relative to the amendment, because as I read this is specifically for Tumon and Tamuning precinct to subsidize, that particular precinct. So My question is, given that it's specific to that precinct and it's located in the tourist area, what actually is, what's allocated to the Tumon and Tamuning precinct at this point that would warrant the extra $2 million to subsidize?
Okay, thank you, Senator Underwood. Senator Egan, would you yield?
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman, and thank you, Senator, for excellent question. First and foremost, $500,000 right now is already being allocated specifically to fund 2 or 3 uniformed police officers over the Tumon precinct. That's one item. The second component is I'm looking for funds to be able to provide to the Guam Police Department for public safety purposes. Right now, it costs the community of Guam $3.8 million just for the operations over at the Tumon precinct. The Tumon precinct is one of our primary public safety entities that is in the heart of Tumon. Now, the question, at least from my mind, is if there are any additional resources, where should we allocate it? And anything coming out of the Tourist Attraction Fund, although it's not restricted to just tourism, it really should be allocated to the Tumon precinct so that it can reinforce the operations of the Guam Police Department and then allow for the chief to use the additional funding that is provided specifically for other operational requirements within the Guam Police Department. So we're looking at $3.8 million for the cost of the operations of the Tumon precinct.
So it's $500,000 out of the $2 million that we are appropriating through this amendment, and specifically noted only $500,000 will be appropriated to the Tumon. It's already appropriated. Okay, above and beyond. You know, Mr. Chairman, I still have my reservations regarding the $2 million that is being allocated. I mean, that will be specific to the Tumon and Tamuning precinct, because this is what this amendment is about. It's not about additional funds for other operations. It's specific to that particular precinct. So, in the absence of an itemized budget or itemized expenditures that are projected for this, I really have my reservations at this point. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Speaker Wampat. Oh. Senator Barnes.
Mr. Chair, and Mr. Chair, as I look at this amendment and I look at my colleagues who who support this amendment, I find myself sometimes stuck between a rock and a hard place as I look at the intended purpose of the Tourist Attraction Fund and what it's really utilized for. I'm not going to deny the fact, Mr. Chair, that the Tourist Attraction Fund was created to promote, protect, and perpetuate our island, and to have our visitors visit, our tourists visit our island and the beauty that we have to offer. And I know that what comes with that is being able to show the beauty of our island, to make sure that our destination product is at the highest expectancy to what the visitors want to see, but more importantly is to literally find out who we are. And when the intent of this proposal was given, I want to share that in the past as Oversight Chair that I've never, I was always open-minded to making sure that the safety and the protection of our visitors and more importantly, our residents here in Guam is protected. And being able to support GPD and all the law enforcement agencies in its effort. I won't deny the fact that we have stepped up to the plate as our committee. We had to have an open mind and look at what was needed for law enforcement, for GPD. And Mr. Chair, last year we did give, if I'm not mistaken, we gave over $2 or $3 million alone in fiscal year 2016 to make sure that the events that Guam hosted, the visitors that need to be protected, but more importantly, our own residents. But I look at this amendment, Mr. Chair, today, and I see that the way this amendment is written is right now, the good author talks about the projections of what is existing today, that we would reach the $38 million threshold, and he is right. But Mr. Chair, we have to make sure that the intended revenues received for TAF is that it is used for its intended purposes. And if we don't know what the exact actual projections are until the end of the fiscal year, I think that this amendment will cause the Guam Police Department to deficit spend the $2 million from monies that aren't there right now. So, in actuality, Mr. Chair, is I really have reservations of this amendment, and I can appreciate what the author of this amendment is trying to do, is to make sure that they give the resources to GPD and the need for that. But I do know that when the budget was detailed to this August body, that there was a detailed appropriation for each category of what the agency needed. And I just think that putting the cart before the horse may just give for bad practices. And I don't, I just feel, Mr. Chair, that I'm between a rock and a hard place. And I know that we need to make sure that our tourists and our visitors, and more importantly our residents, are safeguarded and protected, and that the safety is there. But being able to authorize this $2 million projections without knowing what we actually have is not a good way moving forward. So like I said, I have reservations with this amendment, and I would respectfully object at this time. And just say for the record, I've always been open to looking at what the law enforcement agency, all law enforcement agencies need. And I've been very open-minded in helping support the cause in the past, as committed and as provided for the last 3 terms as oversight chair. And I just feel at this time that this amendment is, I don't support the amendment. Sana Masi.
Thank you very much, Senator. Madam Speaker.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Chairman, I have some reservations myself, and primarily because the way I look at this, it's like a blank check, so to speak, without having any breakdown in terms of how the monies are going to be used. I can understand, yes, addressing maybe and supporting and financing the Tamuning-Tumon area, and if that is the case, then first of all, then we take that total dollar amount of supporting that particular division or Koban or what have you, and have the money revert then to the rest of the department. But to just blanketly say that is going to support, enhance, or whatever the Tamuning-Tumon area to me does not give me comfort in terms of how the monies are going to be used. It is definitely a bad precedent that this legislature is going to set. I mean, you spent all this time going through every department and agency to find out what their needs are. We're very specific as to what those needs are, and then to do this blanket appropriation just because we know that we're going to reach that mark. And if we are going to reach that mark, then I suggest that then we address it at that time when the monies are in, rather than prospectively doing this. It really sets a bad precedent for this legislature to do that. So, I mean, because you know, Mr. Chairman, that the amount requested by the Department of Education is far, far from what they're actually going to get. We also know is that as far as Medicaid is concerned as well, and MIP, we don't even have the monies. At least with Medicaid, that whatever we put in, for every 45 cents we put in, we're going to double that amount and more. In this case, we're not. So I mean, just dollar-wise, I'm talking about. So you know, I just caution our members when we start doing this type of thing. You know, already advancing some monies even before it reaches the coffers, the general fund. I mean, we saw what happened this year. All these projections about monies coming in, and then here we are. We're finding ourselves now unable to make those payments. And to give advance authorization to spend even before the money comes in is very dangerous.
Thank you very much, Madam Speaker. Any other senator wish to be heard before the close? Any other senator wish to be heard? If not, you may. Oh, wait. Senator Tony Ada.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Chairman, I was listening to the arguments on for and against the amendment. You know, I support the amendment to give our officers of GPD the resources they need. If you just look at the news from yesterday of what our police officers and our policemen and women that they go through, I mean, we can't put a dollar amount on a life. I understand that it may be a dangerous precedent to set, but what are we going to do? We're going to sit here and wait until someone gets injured or killed? Let's stop doing the backward way of supporting and helping our men and women. You know, sometimes it may not always be the right answer, but I think when we try to do what we can, when we can, that's what's important. I mean, anyone picks up the phone and the first people they call is 911. Either a policeman or a woman will come to our aid, or fire or EMS. We can't do the jobs that they do. We can sit here and legislate, but we can't be out there doing the work that they do every day. $2 million, I understand. It's a lot of money. But they put their lives on the line every day for us, for our people, for our visitors. And if this amendment fails, then I hope that when they do come forward and they start asking why the amendment wasn't supported, that those that didn't support the amendment would give them a good explanation. When we speak about the Tourist Attraction Fund, about what it's used for, we look at all the appropriations that's made from it. And I believe that the $2 million going to the Guam Police Department and the Tumani Precinct, if not the only, it's one of the best appropriations made out of that Tourist Attraction Fund. Because that saves the lives of our visitors, of our islanders, and those who frequent down in Tuman or wherever they may be. So I hope that those are, there was an objection made, and I hope that a reconsideration will be made to the objection. If not, I hope my colleagues will support the amendment so that we can give the police department the resources that they need. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Senator Adam. You may close, Senator. Oh, wait, I see two more hands going up. I see Senator Blas, Senator Tom, and Senator Rodriguez.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And Mr. Chair, actually a question directed to the author of the amendment. The amendment calls for this subsidization of operational costs of the Tumon Precinct Command. Question is, what is currently or what is the projected cost?
Do you yield?
Yes, if I may, Mr. Chairman. As a matter of fact, I will have copies of what was received by the majority leader, because this was one of the questions that he asked during the course of the public hearing, Mr. Chairman, during the budget discussion. How much are the people of Guam, the community of Guam, investing into the operations at the Tumon Precinct? And the Chief of Police was able to respond, so if I can ask for copies to be made. Right now, the cost of the Tumon Precinct for the entire operations is $3.8 million. Senator Boss.
Mr. Chair, I would really love to be able to base my further questions after review of that, because there are some, I did come from that area, so I'd like to be able to see that. So if I would yield my
I'll call the other, allow the other two, and when you get that, I'll recognize you again. Senator Tom.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. You know, in listening to the earlier discussions, it seems that the concern is appropriating in advance without at least a breakdown of what that $2 million is for, that it seems that that's where the objection lies. And I think maybe a compromise to this may be to language the amendment to so that it reserves $2 million from the excess funds collected. And then when we have attained that $2 million excess, then we come back here and at that time take a look at GPD's requirements so that then we can use that to supplement GPD's requirements as to the extent that they are able to subsidize, but to justify. So then maybe I'm suggesting that may be the happy medium, is to simply put language in there that will reserve that first $2 million in excess revenues.
On the amendment, go ahead, Senator.
On the proposed amendment, Senator, I really, with the sponsor of the amendment, I really appreciate the nature of you trying to find a middle ground. But let me share something with you. There's a couple of things that I need to share with a number of our colleagues. First of all, someone said advance allocation to spending. We did this 3 months ago for FESPAC, which the executive branch did a good job in terms of carrying out that activity, but we had identified, in collaboration with them, $1.3 million in advance appropriation. Very similar language to what we have here. But let me share, Mr. Chairman, this budget contains an additional allocation of $200,000 towards discretionary programs and projects, above and beyond what was provided for this fiscal year alone. That did not go to public safety. And let me throw out numbers again, just for purposes of our colleagues who may have just arrived recently. The allocation here in this budget is 35.6. The allocation for personnel is 33.4. And we're still, that's exclusive of overtime payments. The allocation for utilities, that's is power, water, and communications, is $1.3 billion. That brings us down to $0.9 million just for the rest of operations. But guess what, Mr. Chairman? Fuel costs for all of these vehicles that are transiting, the public safety vehicles, patrols, is $500,000. So $0.9 million minus $500,000, we're down to 0.4. The rental of the facilities that right now GPD is obligated to pay, whether we like it or not, is $670,000. Mr. Chairman, this budget provides a negative $200,000 allocation as is and does not take into consideration the initiatives that the chief has already implemented. He's looking at other resources, not only compact impact, he's also looking at other funding sources. He's been able in the last year to procure 4 patrol vehicles, in addition to setting aside $86,000 so that he can repair and maintain existing patrol fleets. So right now, Mr. Chairman, with this statement about I need to caution everyone here because we're advancing appropriation, we're advancing it for public safety, Mr. Chair. Public safety. If one major incident occurs in Tumon Bay and the resources and the tools and the people and the patrol officers are not readily available to provide that need of service, then there goes our tourism industry. Literally, we will get a negative hit in our tourism industry because we're not providing sufficient funding to this law enforcement agency. So I appreciate the amendment that is being proffered, Mr. Chairman, but what we want to do is make sure that the executive branch and the Guam Police Department has the tools necessary to say, okay, our revenue projection is slightly above, is tracking above, let's take those resources so that rather than giving GPD a negative $200,000 in allocation for operations based on what is provided, that we give them a tool that they can use so that they can finance and help support the initiatives coming out of the Guam Police Department. Mr. Chairman, let me close on this statement. We had our police officers who were beaten not too long ago. That police officer put his life on the line. And I'm going to sit here and say, well, you got to do with what you got. No. That's one of the reasons why this amendment is being proffered. We know that in this fiscal year and last fiscal year, there were excesses in the tourist attraction fund, and we should rightfully give it to the Guam Police Department so that the chief can continue his initiatives. And I shared a little earlier, Mr. Chairman, that the chief of police is redeploying uniformed police officers out into the field. Up to about 50 uniformed police officers are being reassigned out to the field. So, Mr. Chairman, we ask ourselves the question, when these initiatives are being implemented, are we going to step back and fund other discretionary funding in the amount of $200,000 rather than giving it to the Guam Police Department? Or are we going to say, well, it's an advance appropriation, we don't even realize the money, but we're already allocating it because we already have seen some tracking in this fiscal year and the prior fiscal year. So I ask our colleagues, let's give the chief of police and the Guam Police Department the resources so that they can do their job rather than ask for an oversight hearing to find out what happened in this case when we could have prevented it. And this is where we can prevent it, by giving them additional resources should it come in. Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Chairman, if I may just clarify, I did not make a motion. I just simply suggested, but even the mere suggestion brought about the impassioned remarks. So forget I even suggested it.
Thank you, Senator Rodriguez. You're recognized.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. Mr. Chair, if you can just help me understand this better. So there's the amendment that would take excess revenue from the Tourist Attraction Fund, $2 million to be exact, and set it and provide that for the Guam Police Department. And this is where I need your guidance and help. So our revenue that we have adopted for the Tourist Attraction Fund is 40 point something. Is that correct?
Correct.
Okay, so and then now on for GVB we have we're appropriating, say 21 million, or what, 20?
Yes.
That's correct. So if you can help me understand, where are the other I know there's bond payments perhaps that are accounted for.
And the pass-throughs, and Parks and Recreations, and the mayors, and
Okay, so
yes.
okay. So I guess where I'm trying to get here, Mr. Chairman, is that if we are already anticipating an excess of revenue, why have we only adopted a $40 million number for the tourist attraction fund, and we're saying here we're already going to exceed that by $2 million?
That is a new number that was not presented to us. There is no new. That was the number that we have in the budget bill is the number that was presented to us at the public hearing.
So this $2 million is. So where is that?
If it's going to be in excess, I suppose because like last year there was more than what was anticipated. This is in anticipation of that.
Okay, so.
But right now in the budget bill, the number that we put in was the number that was testified to.
Okay.
And the number that we had put together was the last 3-year average with a small increase.
Okay, so is it correct to say, to assume that the first, number one, this $2 million is not a number that we can be assured? We can't look GPD in the eye and say, this is $2 million that is going to be in the bank for you.
I believe that was the argument that was being presented earlier by Senator Munya Barnes.
Okay, so I guess I see it the same way. And the other point I'm trying to make, Mr. Speaker, is that we have this flooding issue down in Tumon. There was a bond that was taken out maybe 7-8 years ago, that a bond that was floated. The main objection of that was to, number one, get the museum built and running, and the others were the two-month flood problem down there. And then after that, all the other items that were added to it. We haven't resolved the flood issue down in Tumon. The $11 million that was set aside is clearly not going to be enough for the alternatives that are on the table. And in talking with GVB, I've known that that issue is an issue that is a priority for them, and that's something that they're seeking our assistance here to be able to address. Not to say that the police department is not important. Of course, police department is very important. However, the funds that we're talking about here, the Tourist Attraction Fund, that was set up to provide for issues like the two-month flood mitigation, the issue down there. And so, all I'm asking our colleagues to perhaps consider is that if there is going to be that extra revenue, is that it be put aside and help GVB, help the government build up that fund so that we don't have to go out and borrow more money. Because the way it looks like, $11 million that we set aside for the flood project in 2 months is not going to be enough. They've expended, I think, about $5 million already for phase 1 and 2. And so what is remaining in there will clearly not be enough. And I would hate, to come before this body again and say that we need to borrow more money to fix that problem when we've borrowed, I don't know how much it was for the first bond, the hot bond.
86, yeah.
How much was it?
86.
80 some million, and we couldn't get what the main intent of that first bond was to fix the flood problem down in 2 months. So that's the only caution I'm asking, and asking our colleagues to please consider. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Senator. Senator Frank Boss.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And thank you to the Oversight Chair for Public Safety for providing this copy of the letter from the Chief of Police. However, Mr. Chair, when I look at the amendment and I look at the letter, I'm going to have to raise a little concern here. Because the amendment says to subsidize the operational cost of the Tumon precinct. Earlier, and it says that an amount not to exceed $2 million. And I read this letter. Current operational cost for the Tumon precinct command is about $3.8 million. And then it says, in essence, the subsidizing of the Guam Police Department's operating budget of approximately $3.8 million from TAF. Couple things come to mind here. If we're going to subsidize the operational cost of the Tumon precinct with this $2 million, that means then subsidizing that cost means then that we're going to add up to $2 million more to 3.8. Furthermore, in the chief's letter, it says that if they were to receive a $3.8 billion subsidy, that they could actually shift that money to the COPS initiative. So I'm a little concerned with regards to the wording of the amendment in itself, in that it's going to restrict. It's not going to offset, it's not going to change out, it's going to subsidize. So the language here is specific. It says going to go to Tumuning precinct. It's going to subsidize it. So in essence, it's going to raise Tumuning precinct's operational costs to $5.8 million, despite what the chief wants to do with the subsidy. This language is not going to permit that. So I caution that if that is the intent. Because, and then thereby it goes back to my question. If you're already spending $3.8 million, what is the subsidy, what is this $2 million subsidy going to do for the Tumon precinct? I want to support them, but I want to know where the money's going. So I'll sit and I'll listen intently as to how this question will be answered. I just fear that this is going to restrict, and it's the unintended consequence is that the chief is not going to have the flexibility that he thought he would have. Thank you very much, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. There was a question raised, and I'm not sure that if the main author wants to yield, but I saw the hand of a co-sponsor. Were you going to offer an answer? Well, Senator Uggan, Senator Respicio is.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. Mr. Chair, that's really a good point that the previous speaker is making. But if we go back to the genesis of this initiative, there were several terms ago, several budget cycles ago, this legislature was forthright in providing $500,000 to the Tumuning precinct, with an additional $600,000 to pay for the security cameras that they just recently installed. And so the oversight chair of TAF has made a very eloquent argument that the TAF has been used above and beyond because tourism just doesn't start and end in Tumon. And so this idea, several fiscal years ago, we've been wanting GPD to quantify how much it is exactly that it's going to cost to run the Tumon precinct. And so when we appropriated the $500,000 at the time, they did not give us a number. They just provided this information to us in a letter dated August 16, 2016. And this is probably where it goes back to, if we budget our government of Guam in a performance-based budgeting, as you've been advocating since the 2007 fiscal year budget cycle, this kind of information will be readily available. We should know by department, by division, by section, how much it costs to run those functions. And we shouldn't start from the number that was appropriated to that department. They start from zero. And so this amendment that Senator Uggan is offering means that whatever is deemed in excess of whatever is projected collection-wise, that money goes to GPD, but it does not. It means that GPD can then use its budget that was appropriated for other villages throughout the island. As the chief of police indicated, whatever money can be provided to GPD in this fashion or any other fashion will be used to fund the COPS initiative program that will put more boots on the ground. And so when we started floating this idea of having the Tourist Attraction Fund fund the Tumon precinct, I'm sure it's something that the visitor industry will support, because we're trying to protect the goose that lays the golden egg and make it so that our community and our tourists feel safe and they would continue to come here. In response to that, GVB has started the concierge program, and they're working closely with GPD to provide that visitor safety and increase the visitor satisfaction experiences coming to Guam. This, the way this amendment is being done, as was pointed out earlier, we wouldn't really know what the collections in excess of projections are until after the fiscal year. So I'm a co-sponsor of this amendment, and the chief wrote this letter in response to something I've been asking them to do for a while now. Is just so maybe this whole discussion that we had can really be a good opportunity for the oversight chair of GPD and the oversight chair of TAF to work together in future budget preparations to make sure that when we determine what the TAF is going to project, that we, along with providing funding for the mayors and for parks and recs, that it will be embedded in their minds that they really ought to have the TAF fund the Tumuning precinct. But we got to do that at the beginning of the budget process and not at the tail end. And so maybe this amendment, instead of calling for an appropriation, maybe it call for a mandate for both GPD and GVB to quantify and determine what that amount is, and to try to include that in the TAF budget. That's just a suggestion. If this amendment is not going to pass in this fashion, I don't think it's going to be because there's no support for GPD, but I just think mechanically it's hard to determine what those projections are. If it said collections over projections in 16, then as we've known in the past, that's real cash. And that's why the projections in excess of collections were appropriated to fund, those were surpluses. And so maybe perhaps can we take a minute recess to figure out where we're going with this amendment?
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman, and I really want to thank everyone for really the lively discussion in regards to this particular initiative. Mr. Chairman, when I first came in to the session this morning, I was hearing discussions about a possible adjustment of the revenue that was adopted by this body not too long ago by $1 million. And that $1 million was going to go towards GVB. Okay, that was part of the conversation. But Mr. Speaker, Mr. Chairman, I already laid out the requirements here. Right now, we are about ready to adopt a budget proposal based on the budget hearing to the Guam Police Department, our primary entity or one of our primary public safety agencies, and really give them a negative $200,000. A negative $200,000 for the entire fiscal year of 2017. But yet we're looking at identifying additional revenues and allocating it elsewhere so that in fact it be used by another entity. And one of our colleagues, Mr. Chairman, was absolutely right in terms of the use of the term subsidy. And I say that wording has to be amended so that it's truly reflective of what the intent here is. If in fact there's going to be any revenues realized out of the tourist attraction fund during the course of the entire fiscal year 2017, that those revenues up to $2 million really should go towards the operation of Tumon Precinct, so that we would allow the chief of police to utilize the allocation, the lump sum appropriation for the Guam Police Department. Guess what? Where is it going to go, Mr. Chairman? It's going to go towards services for the rest of the island community, to ensure safety in Jigo, to man perhaps the Jigo Koban or the Talafofu Koban with additional personnel, or maybe even the Southern Precinct, or maybe provide additional initiatives so that in fact when the chief of police makes that decision to push out or to redeploy or redesign or reassign 50 uniformed police officers out into the villages, that they don't only have their shoes on, but they have vehicles, they have motorcycles, they have equipment, they have tools, so that they can assure the community that in fact public safety is present, physically present, and that the services are out there, and they can continue to trust that when they call for additional support or immediate support, that those services will be readily available. So, Mr. Chairman, it just behooves me to listen to some of the comments that have been made when, in fact, 3 months ago, there was a very similar language to what is contained in here of excess allocation of the Tourist Attraction Fund to fund the FESPAC activities. Very similar language, Mr. Chairman. And that's what we're trying to do. We're trying to not only, in addition to the other tools that you have provided in this budget for the Chief Executive to use his transfer authority, but we're trying to ensure that GPD at the beginning of the fiscal year has the resources so that it can adequately operate our number one or one of our many public safety entities. Mr. Chairman, I ask the consideration of the members of the body, and I would like to move for the amendment or the deletion of the word subsidize, Mr. Chairman, and insert the word fund. So it would read to fund the operational costs of the Tumon Precinct. And then on that very next line, Mr. Chairman, to delete the words, the purposes of enhanced. Because we certainly want to give the Chief of Police that flexibility to enhance the services, but the intent here is to make sure that he has the tools and the funding to be able to fund that precinct initially. So, Mr. Chairman, I'd like to move for that amendment and then move for the previous question. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Chair, before we vote on the bill, you know what the sponsor of the amendment said, that there was language that would call for basically an advance appropriation to fund FESPAC. That was a proposal made by someone outside of this body, but you were one of the first ones who said that that's ludicrous to try to do an advance appropriation from future collections of the TAF. So we didn't go down that road. And my recollection is correct, right, Mr. Chair? That we didn't. This body's never made any advance appropriations off the Tourist Attraction Fund. They try to get the idea from the advance appropriations for textbooks, and believe that's the only advance appropriation that any legislature has ever done. But before we call for the question, I just want to ask Mr. Chairman, by saying the Guam Police Department is authorized to use any of its fiscal year 2017 appropriations for such purposes, and such appropriations shall be reimbursed upon collection of the excess TAF revenues. Would GPD take this to mean that they have an additional $2 million and they would be spending this $2 million? So it's kind of outfitted like it's going to be a loan by the TAF, because whether the TAF collects or not, the TAF will be responsible for any encumbrances made off of this up to $2 million authorization. Am I correct, Mr. Chair?
Yes, the way that it's written is they can start spending already. Yeah. And as one of the others said, if there is no excess,
we're in for it.
They are deficit.
Unlike the $500,000 appropriation contained in the budget from the TAF, that's already $500,000 recognized for projections for FY17.
Correct.
Thank you.
There was an amendment made, suggested by Senator Uggan. Anyone want to speak on those two additional amendments? No, Frank didn't. Frank's motion, but Frank just asked for two more amendments on his amendment.
Delete the word, or change the word subsidized to fund.
And on that amendment, is there any objection? On line 4, Guam Police Department to subsidize, strike subsidize and insert fund. On that amendment, is there an objection to changing the word? And then on line 5, I believe his amendment is to strike the 5 words for the purpose of enhanced.
Mr. Chairman, I think it also would be appropriate, perhaps more appropriate, just put a period right after TTPC and delete the words after that in that same sentence with the Tumun Precinct Command, period.
And just put a period there.
Yes, correct. And then delete the rest of that sentence. That would be more appropriate.
Yeah. I mean, that's what it does. But anyone on that one, on that amendment? On the entire, Senator Espaldon?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Chair, I've been listening very intently on this specific matter, and the last exchange between yourself and a member of this body basically implies, or actually overtly states, that if we go down this road, it seems to me, and it also backs to what the author of this amendment said, that now it's almost like we're allowing GPD to accept the fact that they're going to get $2 million more, when in reality that's not what this amendment does. I mean, in other words, you can't spend in advance if it hasn't been realized, because everything is contingent upon an excess of collections of the TAF. And in essence, if they do not reach an excess and they had already spent the money, then they will be running a deficit. I mean, that was really the conversation just a few minutes ago.
In actual fact, what happens is that their appropriation has been increased by $2 million, or their authorization has been increased by $2 million.
Right.
They can spend up to the additional $2 million and they're going to be reimbursed by TAF if and when that $2 million in excess of 2017 is realized.
Right.
And if not, then they've spent $2 million more than they were appropriated. But they've not even, for this year, they haven't even completely spent the amount that they've been appropriated. So I don't know.
Right, and that's the difficulty I have. And not that I don't want to support the police department, I think we all do, right? But this is budget time right now, and we're working with a very conservative budget, and rightfully so, because in the past budgets, and even this past 2016, as conservative as we weren't conservative enough. And now we're looking at opening it up a little bit more. without even realizing or understanding. And we're working with a figure that was given to us by GVB, and yet now we're anticipating $2 million more to give the police department. That's the problem I have, because again, as I stated earlier, before you came in this morning, was that there is, that possibility of always running a deficit, no matter how hard we try to balance the budget. And if we keep going on this road, it seems to me, let me just rephrase it, it seems to me that the proper way to do this is that when we are tracking, or perhaps when we have reached that threshold of $40 million of collection for revenues for TAF, that is a time to look at any extra revenues coming in and do a supplemental budget for this specific purpose. But to do it now seems to be perhaps adding fuel to that fire of never ending the cycle of deficit spending. And so I have problems with it as well. Not that I don't want to support the police department at this point, but in light of what you stated in terms of they haven't even used their full budget for 2016 yet, and in light of the fact that we're going to appropriate something that may not be realized, and yet they would have access to almost anticipate it being realized, it would seem irresponsible. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Frank.
Just
Senator
a question,
Blas?
Mr. Chair. Have we even disposed of the GVB budget yet?
No.
No. Okay.
All right. We'll call the question. There's been an objection. Pardon? All right. There's been a request in the second for a roll call. Is there a third? Okay. Clerk will call the roll on the amendment as amended by Senator Uggan.
Senator Tom Atta. Yes. Senator Tom Atta, aye. Senator Tony Atta. Yes. Senator Tony Atta, aye. Senator Uggan. Yes. Senator Uggan, aye. Senator Blas. No. Senator Blas, nay. Vice Speaker Cruz.
Nay.
Vice Speaker Cruz, nay. Senator Espaldon.
No.
Senator Espaldon, nay. Senator McCready. Yes. Senator McCready, aye. Senator Morrison. Senator Morrison, aye. Senator Munya-Barnes. Senator Munya-Barnes, nay. Senator Respicio. Senator Respicio, aye. Senator Rodriguez. No. Senator Rodriguez, nay. Senator San Nicolas.
I did make a move to excuse.
Senator San Nicolas excused. Senator Torres. Senator Torres, nay. Senator Underwood. Senator Underwood, aye. Speaker Wampat. Speaker Wampat, nay.
The vote 7-7. 1 excused. Fails. Any other amendments on this chapter? Just give me 1 second, please. Okay, I'm sorry. Let's go. I'm sorry. As I understand it, we went to the end of it, and we haven't gone through the section. So, on the appropriation, there being an objection. We're on page 57. So we're going section by section now so I can clean this up. Okay? Fine. Reserve. Subsection 2. Transfer authority restriction. Four, cost-sharing initiative related to the criminal justice information system. Five, oh, this is Senator McCready's amendment. 5. The public law provide. Any all right, Department of Public Safety is completed. Yes.
There were 2 amendments that were previously adopted. One was in reference to prior year obligations authorization, and the other one was the public safety vacancy pool. Okay, just for your information, Mr.
They passed earlier, didn't they? Yep, I initialed them. All right. Department of Corrections. Department of Corrections, the appropriation. There was an amendment? Who has an amendment? And section 1, subsection 1, any? Subsection 2, cost, care, and custody of prisoners confined in facilities. Consolidated agreement with Guam Memorial Hospital, 1.1. For transfer authority restrictions. Five, cost-sharing initiative related to the criminal justice information system. Yes. Sure.
Sorry. I remember we having discussions about this with the gentleman from Massachusetts a couple years ago. We were both in those meetings. Is this the reflection of that meeting that we're transferring? It was supposed to be about $5 million total for that year. Is this the program that we were talking about?
Correct, and this is the amount that was requested by the administration. It's part of an MOU with GMH and DOC to run their clinic or
yes, This
medical
would actually put us
facilities.
in compliance with the
Federal
stipulated agreement with the
consent
federal-
decree, yes.
Okay. And then is the $1 million something that's going to be an annual appropriation that we have to consider every year? And is there a timeline that we're going to say?
It's an allocation within it, and depending on whether or not they continue it.
Okay.
I mean, depending on how well this works, and it seemed to be working really well. I know
Yes.
they've assigned some very high-powered people to oversee to make sure that the operation works well, so that the federal judge is satisfied with the program. I see Senator Bloss's hand go up.
So our initial investment was $5 million. Then we built the existing, or we rehabilitated the existing facility. Then that $5 million also went to pay for this government-to-government partnership, I think we were calling it at that
This
time.
is an allocation within their 26.
Okay. So the $5 million has been expended, now we're going $1 million
Correct.
here. Is there a graduating, or is there a ceiling that we're going to say now that $1 million is going to be $500,000 or $250,000, or is it going to stay at $1 million and move up?
It depends on what kind of operation they have and what their agreement is between them, and whether or not they do anything about the fact that they have some infirmed, older inmates, and how they decide that they're going to deal with that.
So it's safe to say with the increase of the inmate population, this number of $1 million is probably the floor up. It's not going to go down, it's going to go up. Are they expending the entire $1 million?
That is their agreement between themselves, because they have to handle the pharmacy and a couple of other things. I'm not sure how they break that down, but this is the amount that they requested in the budget.
And one more question, I'm sorry, this is the last one. If they don't expand the $1 million, that money goes back into the general fund, or do we lockbox it for something else?
No, this $1 million is allocated from within the appropriation that we gave them in subsection 1.
Okay.
Okay, it's not a separate appropriation for this MOU.
Okay, thank
They can allocate up to 1.1 depending on what their agreement is, or whatever they have to pay. Okay? Senator Blas?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Chair, along the lines of subsection 3, or section 3, I noticed the operative word here was may as opposed to shall. Is there a reason?
No, we just left it up to them. I mean, they have an agreement, and they have a consent decree that they had better be complying with, so hopefully whatever it is that is needed to fund that relationship will continue. But if it'll make you feel better, you can change it. You can make the amendment to shall, but it's just, it's not all the way, I mean, if it's going to cost more, then but we just put it up to.
Yeah, that's what I was going to suggest, that we change the word may to shall, the sum of up to. So it'll read line 26, the sum of up to $1,100,000 shall be allocated.
On that amendment? Thank you. We'll send the amendment back for your signature, for your initial. I understand, Senator Uggan and McCready, you have an amendment? You're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. This, the author of the amendment yielded to me, so I'll just speak on this real quickly. This is something that we have done prior year as well. I remember, if it wasn't last budget, it was the previous budget that we added language for prior year obligations authorization for the Department of Corrections. And I think this is something that we all project is going to happen. There's going to be prior year obligations, and it has to deal mostly with overtime. So I think what the author previously said when we were speaking about GPD, we don't have to have oversight. We don't have to ask them questions. The fact of the matter is, I think we know that there's going to be some prior year obligations due from the Department of Corrections, and therefore the amendment was proffered. We have done it before, and it has passed through the budget as well. Thank you.
On the amendment proffered by Senator Uggan and McCready, Senator Espaldon.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I was wondering if maybe one of the two authors might be able to answer the question of, do we know or can we anticipate what that amount would be?
If I may,
yield? Yes.
Thank you very much, Senator, for that question. What we've done, and copies were forwarded to all the senators in regards to the most recent prior year obligations list as of June of this year. And upon the closure of this fiscal year, we will be having a subsequent discussion with Department of Corrections to see what they have been able to address out of this fiscal year's budget or fiscal year. And then we will provide that information shortly after that. So what it is because we provided the Department of Corrections and the executive branch with the tool to be able to utilize this fiscal year's funding to pay prior year, we're going to look at concluding this fiscal year and then get the most current information. So it's an excellent question. I just don't have that until such time that the fiscal year closes, and then I'll be able to provide that to the senator, good senators asking that question, and to all of the senators. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Mr. Chairman, the problem I have with that explanation is that if they are aware, if the department is aware that we are going to allow them to do prior year funding in their 2017 budget, there is nothing to prevent them from going out and encumbering a lot more expenses in this fiscal year, knowing full well that going forward we already allowed them to use 2017 budget. So if we don't even know what to expect, this could be a very open-ended authorization to go ahead and do and spend what they're going to spend without any real basis to give that authorization.
In their budget request, they listed their prior year obligation at $735,472.
$735,000. And I would imagine that, and I don't know how this works, but I give per ratio. If you add another, if you divide that by 3 3/4, so that comes out about $250,000 authorization. $250,000 per quarter of what they spent, so that we would have to pay, right? Is it safe to even project that perhaps in this last quarter it would be another $250,000, and that way you limit the amount of authorization that we would limit the amount of authorization of which they could use? Because if we don't, then again, we will be back here next year at the same time with running a deficit that we don't even know what it is at this point.
Hopefully the way that we structured this one, in their request, the largest part of the prior year authorization was GMHA. Bills by the inmate, run up by the inmates at GMH, and I believe that was all taken care of in that $10 million swap in June, when the government of Guam paid off everything that owed GMH so that GMH could pay the withholding tax. And there was $83,000 to Department of Corrections in Oregon for a couple of the inmates that we have up there, but we've set aside $701, I believe, in this one for the cost of having our inmates incarcerated in off-island facilities. And so I don't imagine the bigger part is whether or not there are any current lawsuits as it relates to their overtime, but I believe that they've satisfied their overtime and any prior lawsuits as it relates to overtime. I'm not sure if that's been addressed, but that was not in their request, so I have a feeling that must have been taken care of. But you're right, by doing this,
we open the door. or we leave the door open for an expense amount that we're not even probably entertaining in our mind that could come back to kick us in the butt.
And it's just trying to figure out how to get everybody to submit their bills or at least encumber it, like to Oregon and to other places before the close of the fiscal year, so it doesn't become a prior year that hasn't been addressed.
Right. I won't object, but I have a concern.
Okay, you know, I understand. That's why when it said prior year, I immediately looked for your comment. I believe Senator McCready and then Senator Ogden.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I just had a question. You mentioned that the request for, I think, just north of $700,000 worth for the previous year obligation. If I remember correctly, the previous year obligations that we've approved in the past were mostly for overtime, but that is when the Department of Corrections was about 50 or 60 officers short. They've since filled some of those vacancies. So I'm wondering if the $700,000 now is, do we know what that's for?
Yes, as I said, it was $492,000 for GMH.
Okay.
For bills, $83,000 for Department of Corrections, $50,000 for GWA.
Okay. So the $82,000 probably reflects the overtime cost. No.
There was
no overtime.
It wasn't listed in their 735.
Because previously, in previous budgets, we've almost hit the $1 million mark with overtime, correct?
They went $3 million this last.
$3 million. Wow. Okay. Thank you.
That number's burned in my mind when they testified to that.
Okay.
It's within their budget. They are taking care of it. That's how much they expended. Senator Ogden, hopefully you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Just for the information of members of the body, there were extensive discussions and deliberations with the U.S. Department of Labor in terms of paying overtime. So you're going to find out that, in fact, Department of Corrections is almost current with meeting their obligations to their uniformed personnel and overtime, only because back in May there were extensive deliberations and U.S. Department of Labor was about ready to take Department of Corrections to court. So fortunately they were able to address the prior year obligations, pay up to that date, and then to date they are almost current.
Okay. So on the Ogden-McCready amendment for prior year, any objection? Department of Corrections, one more.
One more, please, Mr. Chairman, if I may.
Has everybody seen it? It's similar to the one that was on for GPD on their vacancy pool. Has this side gotten it? Yes. The prior year DOC.
Mr. Chairman, I believe everyone has a copy of the proposed amendment.
Yes.
Mr. Chairman, if I can ask the consideration of the body, the members of the body, this would be a very similar provision that was added to the Guam Police Department, and this would allow Department of Corrections to continue use of the public safety vacancy pool account funds from fiscal year 16. We all know that one of the statements that the Department of Corrections is presently recruiting slightly in excess of 40 additional corrections recruits, and that process is still ongoing, and they've requested that in fact they be given the opportunity to continue to have access to this fund, and they should get most of their personnel immediately upon the closure of all the documents on board within 6 months in terms of completion of training. So, Mr. Chairman, the commitment on the acting director was that, in fact, as a result of the recruitment of the 40 additional officers, that he anticipates reducing the overtime costs, which is tracking right now at $3 million for Department of Corrections, down to a figure slightly north of $1 million. So, based on this, Mr. Chairman, I'd like to ask consideration of the body. Thank you.
And this is for what was appropriated in the current year's appropriation. Senator McCready?
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you to the author of the proffered amendment. I think it was Senator Tony Atta who said that in his last comments for the GPD bill was that we know the problems and we can sit here and act like it's going to fix itself or find the solutions. This is imperative, this vacancy pool. Granted, it might not be used as quick as we would like it. I know there's a lot of bureaucracy that we wish we could avoid. But the fact of the matter is, we need, I mean, you know as well as I do, Mr. Vice Speaker, Mr. Chair, I think we need an entirely new facility up there. But for now, we know that we need bodies to fill the vacancies, whether it's GPD, whether it's Department of Corrections, Customs, Marshals, whatever law enforcement, we need to continue to make sure that we're properly staffed. And I think this is the solution that we've had. And this vacancy pool hasn't been around very long. And I think it's imperative that we keep it. And we make sure, the legislature makes sure that it's successful. All we have to do is partner up with these individuals. Hopefully we can kind of lift some restrictions and get some new employees and keep the new employees every year. So I hope this is something that we need, and I hope the body also agrees. Thank you.
On the amendment, the vacancy pool continuing appropriation. Department of Corrections is closed. Department of Agriculture. Senator Muñoz Barnes and then Senator Espaldon.
Mr. Chair, if I may, I know that Department of Agriculture's request at 3.734732 million. I just wanted to ask if there's anyone, you or the oversight or anyone here that can help me answer the breakdown as it relates to the positions for the biosecurity and the inspections of the division at Department of Agriculture, because there were some concerns that came in regarding the positions not being filled, and that I know in the past that we have given them the resources they needed. So if you can just, I just want to make a verification. I'm understanding that the legislature...
The entomologist vacancy hasn't been filled, that I'm aware of.
It hasn't been filled by way of FT, but I believe that it's been filled by a contract. But I can confirm that. But based on, in response to what Senator Barnes said, we did provide a continuing appropriation from the Biosecurities Fund for them to begin with the recruitment of a program coordinator, so that the program coordinator can go after the collection of these funds and have these fees paid, and as the fund grows, that they have the ultimate flexibility to outfit that division with those resources that are necessary.
That we were able to, I didn't ask that question at their hearing. Yeah, every warrant body has been funded if they were there, and
I know, I know that was in the past a division of more than 6. Now, if I'm not mistaken, based on the vacant positions through attrition and retirement, that position is either I know no more than 2. One is being subsidized by a labor grant, and I just wanted to make sure, because I do know that in the past there were concerns about the mandates through the federal grant funding that comes in for agriculture, and there was just concerns that the warm bodies, that the positions that were needed were not allocated for, or not even for supplies and equipment for that division.
Mr. Chair, I don't have any objections bookmarking this section, because along with the concerns raised by Senator Barnes, there's also the issue of the conservation officers. We did, by separate statute, mandate that those conservation officers that were LTAs moved into the classified service, and that was by a standalone statute. And up to this point, I don't believe that matter was done, and that process was ever done. So I don't have any objections bookmarking this issue, and I would seek those answers that Senator Barnes is raising. Unless there's but I'm open to hearing what other concerns our colleagues may have with agriculture, so I could get with the director to get those answers for our colleagues.
Senator Espaldon.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Chair, just out of curiosity, the $500,000 from the Tourist Attraction Fund, is that broken down on how that's supposed to be spent, or is that just kind of a general appropriation from Tourist Attraction Fund to them?
It's just to assist in making the appropriation level that they need.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I would suppose
that was per the executive budget.
Right, and I would suppose that the purpose for tapping into the Tourist Attraction Fund by the Department of Agriculture would be to help promote the
the governor's request was the Tourist Attraction Fund was supposed to be used for animal control, conservation officers, and for the invasive species.
Yeah, the rhino beetle.
Those three appropriations came up to about 500, and that's what the 500 was for.
Animal control, invasive species, and
conservation officers.
Conservation officers. Okay, well, at least this area is bookmarked for now. I probably don't have problems. I think invasive species is definitely a very important area. The hiring of conservation officers and whatnot. Kind of a stretch, but okay. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Mr. Chair, maybe if I could ask, based on the Tourist Attraction Fund, because I know that there was a need as we continue to try and eradicate the rhino beetles from our tree of life. I know that those positions that were temporarily there in the utilization for this fund, that has run out, and according to them, and those folks that were there to help with the eradication, nobody's there now. And so if they have a detailed listing for that provision of the 500,000, I would like just to see where they're putting that in, because the way I understood it, it was for the invasive species. I think it was the rhino beetle and the bark beetle, if I'm not mistaken.
Of the 500, 157,843 was to go for animal control. 84,314 was to go for conservation officers, and 257,843 was to be used for invasive species. That was the allocation submitted to us by the governor's office in their executive budget request. And there was a request to bookmark. I just want my colleagues to know that, yes, we have passed several pieces of legislation that relates to to Department of Agriculture. The implementation has not been done, and I don't know you're going to be able to do it in the next 3 days, and nor can we order it from here. We've given them the authorization, and I'm still getting calls because it still hasn't been implemented, but it was passed out of here. So is there... All right, we'll bookmark it for right now, and that'll be the appropriation section. Animal shelter, 150. I don't know if anybody got all their money. I doubt it. Okay, so Department of Agriculture. Is the speaker around? We're going into the Guam Library. The public library. No objection. Any other comments? If not, public library. Department of Youth Affairs, Oversight Chair Senator Underwood.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you for the appropriation, which is actually the same as last year's. I just wanted to be able to speak to the fact that on July 6th, pay period ending July 6th, the pay for hazardous work was actually stopped for all employees at the Department of Youth Affairs. A couple of my colleagues and I here in this body is actually working with other agencies to ensure that we address the need for specific employees to have the pay differential, especially as those employees are exposed to high-risk youth who may have committed a crime. And so to the extent that the hazardous pay, as we would term it, had actually been stopped for, I believe it was government-wide, and there's a re-examination of that. I just look forward to working with our colleagues to address that. Right now, we actually had budgeted for the pay differential about 10% with the fiscal year 2016. So in the event that that will be restored for specific employees, that would be budgeted for, given that we have the same budget that's being proposed for fiscal year 2016.
And I think it should be made clear that the decision had nothing to do with anything that this legislature did.
Right.
That was a purely executive action. Please make sure clear.
Yes.
Because otherwise we get blamed for everything, and I'm just saying, just
so
make
glad.
sure that it's clear that it was executive action and not anything that the legislature had done.
Yes, absolutely. Let me be very clear that that was a directive from the Department of Administration. And so we are concerned about that, but we are also willing to work with our colleagues in the agencies to ensure that we provide the pay differential specifically for those employees who provide the direct service to our clients in Department of Youth Affairs. Otherwise, Mr. Chairman, I thank you for not cutting the budget for the Department of Youth Affairs. Thank you.
Thank you very much. So on Department of Youth Affairs, anything else? Guam Environmental Protection Agency. Senator Respicio, do you wish as oversight to have any comments? No. The appropriation and all of the monies being received from various federal aid funds. On A, the appropriation total of 1.163206. Yes.
Just for clarification again, as we look at the 108,289 coming from the Tourist Attraction Fund, the delineation for what the money is being utilized for, and it's probably for the beach cleaning, but I wanted to confirm.
Yes, it's beach monitoring.
Beach monitoring. Yeah, beach monitoring. Sorry.
Parks does the beach cleaning, testing. Okay. Subsection 1, subsection 2, 202,992 for the closure, monitoring, and opening of the island's landfills. And the beach monitoring of 108 from the Tourist Attraction Fund. Guam Environmental Protection Agency is closed. Thank you. Department of Labor. Department of Labor. Appropriation 202-042-870. Amount for workers' compensation, $698,593. Department of Labor, anything? Department T, Department of Parks and Recreation. Department of Parks and Recreation, appropriation, Senator Espaldon.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Chair, just it seems to me, and I just want to get it from you, there's $3.2 million is appropriated from the Tourist Attraction Fund, and with about $400,000 for maintenance of public restrooms and about another $350,000 for maintenance of the pools. Just to be clear, how is the remaining balance of $2.4 million from the TF? How is that supposed to be spent?
Just operations of Parks and Recreation.
Okay, and just to be clear, Mr. Chair, because there are many people who don't understand, is it safe to say that Parks and Rec is in essence funded by the Tourist Attraction Fund for the most part?
That is correct.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just wanted to put that for the record. Thank you.
Senator Respicio.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Following those comments from the previous speaker, that's exactly what that amendment was attempting to do, where eventually the Tourist Attraction Fund would also fund the Tumaning Precinct. So I just want to put that in as a part of our active consciousness, not to remove the amendment again, but just to say that this example worked in this instance, and I know that one day that's where the TAF will be with respect to funding that precinct.
Thank you very much. All right. So we've gotten through the appropriation, the limited gaming fund of $663,936. Senator Barnes. Anything? Well, we're going down just to make sure that there's no objections on the sub 3 on maintenance and repair bathrooms. Maintenance of pool facilities, 349-211. And 5, Guam Historic Resource Division. You wish to speak?
Mr. Chair, maybe just a clarification on the Section 5 as it relates to the expended for the classification for the projects, that the State Historic Preservation Officer would be responsible for that amount. Maybe just a clarification, is that State Preservation?
That is her division, yes.
But that the hiring and firing would also go from her? Would also be her and not the director? Because if I'm not mistaken, I do know that during the previous terms of other directors that there was a classification and it was at the director. And maybe I just need a clarification on that.
There's no change in prior law as to the powers of that office. This is just to assure that the office has sufficient funds for its operation. And it's allocated from the main appropriation.
No, yes, sir, I understand that. It's just that the direction and the supervision of that, of the State Historic Preservation Officer over the director, and I just want to say that this was brought up in the past, and I just want to make sure.
This is just to make sure that that a sufficient amount of money is actually allocated for the operation of that office. Well, yes, so that they have enough people to operate the office.
Mr. Chair, if I may, I just want to ask for a verification, so if I can ask the Department of Parks and Recreation. I do know that there was a concern that was brought to our committee's attention as oversight chair. I don't have a problem if that was done in previous budget presentations, but I do know that I just want to make a clarification on that based on the concern from the director.
I'll bookmark it. You can
Thank you.
Try to figure out what the...
Okay.
All right, so 5 is earmarked, bookmarked. 6, groundskeeper services for sale. Allocating up to as much as 10%. Any objection? Save for 5. We'll close Department of Parks. Department of Land Management. Department of Land Management. Office of Chief Medical Examiner. Customs and Quarantine Agency. Department of Chamorro Affairs. I thought this went up to 2 points. I thought this was 250,000 plus the 750. We gave it to her. Okay, Department of Chamorro Affairs. Senator Torres.
Mr. Chairman, on item 2, Guam Museum operations, do these two figures take into account any delays in opening and any lost revenues from the delay in opening so that they can sufficiently curate and become
That
a
was the
fully
reason why
functional thing?
this section was put in.
Okay, thank you. Just
To
looking
address
forward
that.
to our fully operational museum, that's all.
Department of Chamorro Affairs. Department of Military Affairs. Guam Council on the Arts and Humanities Agency, CAHA. Oversight? No. 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 Guam Fire Department. Is there a series of appointments you have on this section? No? Department of Fire? Yeah, on the appropriation section. Senator Arkin? No? Appropriation reserve restriction? Three, transfer authority restriction. Senator Arkin.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Chairman, there's an amendment that's being circulated as we speak, sponsored by yours truly and Senator McCready, and it's very similar to the other two law enforcement agencies, allowing the continued use of the public safety vacancy pool cost account. So, Mr. Chairman, I'd like to request consideration by members of the body, please. Just for information of the most current information is that they just recently closed the recruitment for 25 additional fire recruits, and they should be processing that going into the next FY.
This is for the vacancy pool in the current fiscal year appropriation. Anyone wish to speak? Guam Educational Telecommunications.
I'm sorry, Mr. Chairman, I do have one additional amendment.
Oh, you do?
On GFD.
GFD?
GFD, yeah. Mr. Chairman, the amendment.
The amendment, Senator Uggan, you're recognized on your amendment.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And Senators, this is to add a new sub-item 5. Is hereby added to subsection AA of Section 1, Chapter 5 to read, notwithstanding any other provision of law, the Guam Fire Department is hereby authorized to recruit additional uniformed personnel and to conduct promotions of uniformed personnel. Such recruitment and promotion shall not exceed the Guam Fire Department's fiscal year 2017 appropriations. And this is, Mr. Chairman, in light of what is happening within the fire department right now. They have received notification that approximately 9 of their upper echelon personnel will be retiring upon the conclusion of this fiscal year. And anytime that you're looking at making sure that they're able to properly recruit, it creates an opportunity for promoting some of the other personnel, so that in fact they can assume the additional responsibility. So this is in conjunction with some of these anticipated retirees, and then allowing GFD to utilize these resources so that they can maximize their personnel.
They already have this authorization, but it's a lump sum budget. If anybody else? Guam Fire Department is closed. Guam Education Telecommunications Corporation. Guam Chamorro Land Trust Commission. Guam Regional Transit Authority. Guam Election Commission. Guam Solid Waste Authority. Guam Solid Waste? No, same. Except for the bookmarks in 3. The 84. The appropriation for the legislature. On chapter... Oh, okay. On chapter 6, section 2, appropriation for the Office of Finance and Budget. And section 3. Chapter 6 is closed. Chapter 7 we took care of the other day, is that correct? Are all the amendments? Yeah. Where? Do you have...
Sorry, Mr. Chair. I would like to go back to the legislative, is it chapter 6?
Yes.
And I'd like to just proffer an amendment. Give me a quick recess. 1 minute, please.
Back on with cleared 7 with the AG last week. Is that correct? All right.
Yes, we did clear.
Chapter 7, Legal Services, Public Defender Service Corporation. Mayor's Council of Guam, Chapter 8. Is it on the main appropriation? Okay, those are at the end. Yeah. On the appropriation level, section 1. Section 1. Limited Gaming Fund. Section 3, Street Maintenance and Beautification, $1,036,026. Island-wide beautification, $470,921. Section 5, ground maintenance for schools.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. We did pass out the amendment, and I'm going to have to say it was an oversight for the last couple of years in which we have actually given monies to the ground maintenance for JFK, which is under lease, and that was the responsibility of the leaseholder. And there's the concern of Senahanya, C.L. Titan Elementary School for a couple of years, in which the mayor has indicated and measurements were done to show that their grounds are an equivalent to or slightly even larger than the Ganya Heights Elementary. So what I've done here is to bring it up to the level, the same amount for C.L. Titan as Ganya Heights, which is $9,312, and the balance then by deleting, of course, JFK High School, $21,583, and the balance with a separate amendment, of course, and I don't know where would you want this to be done now or later, which that amount would be then appropriated to a where we have a bookmark of $16,838 to the Guam Commission for Educators Certification for Contractual Services for fiscal year 2017.
Okay, hold on to that, but just we'll note that there's a $16,000 savings here that,
yes,
and your appropriation for that other will have, yes.
Yes.
Senator Underwood.
Right. Mr. Chairman, I need to object to this at this point because I want to be able to consult with the schools regarding the reduction, the overall reduction of the amount that is being appropriated for the grounds and maintenance for schools. Although we have increased the appropriation last year for grounds and maintenance because the schools have been lacking, I still continue to get feedback from the schools that even with the appropriations that we have made specifically for other schools such as Southern High and the other large schools, it's just not enough. So at this point, I would like to be able to confer with the Department of Education because they are being affected by this. $16,000 might not seem a lot, but it is a lot when it comes to the deficiency or not having enough grounds and maintenance or grass cutting for the larger schools. So I would like to be able to please hold off on this until I confer with the schools.
Senator Tom.
Regarding that, there's an overall reduction here. It was originally we had 481,000,
yes,
and rather than for that to be reduced.
That was taken from JFK.
That's right. And so if it's taken from JFK, then I would like to be able to consider reallocating the savings from JFK to the other schools who right now are noted to still be lacking the number of grass cutting that they have on a monthly basis.
Are you aware of any of them?
Yes.
That's why the increase was made to CL Titano, because the mayor has been sending everybody
That's right.
emails and text on that issue. But
And there were other schools such as Southern High that I know for sure had also articulated to my office. I just want to be able to check with DOE.
all right. Senator Tom?
Are we talking on the Speaker's amendment here?
Correct.
So I'm just wondering, in reading this now, the language is very simple. We're appropriating $16,000 from the general fund. And I thought at the beginning we said, okay, if you're going to increase something, you have to identify.
Yeah, we haven't gotten, we're not at teacher certification.
Yes.
No, we're not there. We're just in the mayor's
I got it.
listing.
Got it. Thank you.
And so she has to make that when we go back to that bookmark.
Got it. Thank you.
Okay? We just have two more sections in the mayor and we can close this chapter. All right. Public safety and social education programs.
Mr. Chair, point of order.
Yes.
I just want to make sure I understand. There was a motion, an amendment to delete JFK from this list. Have we acted on that?
No, we didn't. We're bookmarking this
whole section?
This whole subsection.
Okay.
The oversight chair is going to get some information for us so we can address this section, and then we'll complete the discussion on it. Okay? On the public safety and social education programs and host community, 300. Okay, we'll take a lunch break at this point. Everybody, 2 o'clock. Oh, you have, oh wait, I'm sorry. Let's take care of Senator Munya Barnes's 2 amendments in the mayor's.
It's to add a section on Chapter 8 for the continuing appropriations, Mr. Chair, for the unexpended balance of the funds appropriated to MCOG for fiscal year 2016 shall not lapse and shall be available to MCOG for expenditures in fiscal year 2017.
Any objection?
No objection, Mr. Chair, but do we have a roundabout figure in terms of what they're anticipating to be carrying over?
We won't
No.
know that until the end of the year.
Yeah. No objection.
No objection.
And the other amendment, Mr. Chair, if I may, is the authority to make payments on prior year obligations, notwithstanding any other provision of law. The MCOG is hereby authorized to pay for prior year obligations incurred from its fiscal year 2017 appropriations.
Do you have any idea what that is at this point?
No, I don't, but I did ask them for the final figure, and I'm waiting for Mr. Sablan to give me that number back. I think it.
Okay.
Okay. No objection.
Senator Espaldon.
Again, I just
well, let's leave it open. We'll deal with those 2 subsections after lunch. Get the number from them, and the oversight chair will get the number from DOE, and we'll deal with the 2. All right? So the mayor's office. Yes, because I want to. For the prior year application. Yes. 2 o'clock.